Welcome to the Bring the Attitude discussions with mindfulness teachers. My name is Tuйre Šounен. I'm a senior MBSR teacher and a host of today's discussion. These Bring the Attitude discussions are a collaboration between Mindful Awareness Project MAP, which is an international organization bringing awareness to mindfulness and especially Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction program in the Russian-speaking countries. The other partner is Academy Solterreno, an international training school and a retreat-center where we teach and train people as teachers for the MBSR program. The intention of these discussions is really to connect with other MBSR teachers around the world and to hear what are their intentions, motivations of practicing mindfulness and especially teaching mindfulness to other people. So I'm super excited to welcome today's guest, Майкл Андерсон. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael is a qualified MBSR teacher. He's trained in Mindful Academy Solterreno, and that's actually where we met a couple of years ago, right? Yeah. Michael is not only an MBSR teacher, but you're an art teacher. And you teach art in the American school in Vienna, if I'm correct. You're originally American, though. How did you end up in Vienna?
Thank you, Tuйre. So I have been teaching art for a while now and teaching overseas in international schools. And once I found I was looking for a new position, and I knew some people who were in Vienna, and there was a position, and so I just kind of ended up here. And it's kind of a nice feeling of not necessarily knowing where you will end up. You just are open to whatever possibilities, and this is the one that came up, and so here I am, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah. So Europe was never sort of a goal for you. You ended up here.
Sure, I always would have loved to live in Europe, but it worked out that way, and I'm enjoying it, yes.
And when was that? How long have you been in Vienna now?
I've been here now for 6 years.
6 years, cool. All right, so before we get started, for the purpose of this discussion, and it's good perhaps for the viewers to know that in mindfulness, we have a concept, what is called 8 attitudes, or 9 or even 10 these days. These attitudes are sort of, they're tools, they're support on, practicing mindfulness, living a mindful life. And we've asked beforehand every guest to choose one of the attitudes to bring into this discussion. And Michael chose the attitude trust. So trust will be a topic that will sooner or later join us in this discussion. So just want to put that out there. But to begin with, I am curious to hear, Michael, what is your definition of mindfulness? Because I think there are as many definitions as there are teachers. What is yours?
Well, I would say mindfulness to me is really about tuning in our attention and our awareness to our life and to what's unfolding and what's happening, because life doesn't ever just freeze. It's a continuous process, and everything is changing and moving and flowing through our life. And so if we don't have a mindful approach to that, we just kind of get pushed this way or that, and we don't necessarily have a clear sense of what's unfolding in our life. And so to me, it's about cultivating that kind of mindfulness and awareness to my own life, and to see how that also connects to others, so that I can think more carefully and choose how I want to respond to whatever is happening in my life, and how do I want to work with others. And so to me, it's really about cultivating mindfulness and awareness of what's happening.
Yeah, so it's those components coming together for you as well, the awareness, but also the action, the response.
Yes, definitely. What we do and what we say matters incredibly, because those things have a direct impact on what happens next, and or what we do or say can make or break a relationship with someone to the point where what we say can cause harm, or what we say can really turn someone's awareness about their own life. And so it really does matter, the action part.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Sometimes I get or hear people saying that, how can me sitting on a cushion, going within, help in this world? But that's exactly how it helps the world, right? This action component, which is really key in mindfulness practice. We're not just sitting on our cushion for the sake of our own self-awareness, but for the purpose of the wider context and the world.
Yeah, because by going into ourselves and working with ourselves, we're better able to work with others. And that's really where it kind of ripples out. It's not just a personal self-help program.
Yeah, indeed. Michael, how did mindfulness come into your life, actually, to begin with? And when was that?
Well, I find it really interesting to look back and see connections through my life, and to notice things that matter to me now and say, oh, wow, like if when I was 6 years old, I also had this sort of related interest. And so I've always been somewhat of a contemplative person, even from when I was a child. I did a lot of art and music and spent a lot of time in my room sort of working with those things and going inward in more of a child's way. And I was curious about meditation, and I experienced it on occasion as a young adult in my 20s. And I would say the biggest experience that really led me onto a more intentional path was the passing of my mother when I was just over 30 years old. And it really, even though that's a kind of a sad experience, losing someone, it was for me really profound, and I felt a sense of joy about just the profundity of experiencing someone that close to me reaching the end of their life. And she went through a long extended illness, and I had the opportunity to spend a week with her before she passed, and so I knew that this would be the last time I was with her, and it was just incredibly profound for me, because she had reached a point where she had let go of any struggle with it, and she was just completely accepting of what's happening, and that gave her this deep presence that when I was with her was just really, I was awestruck by it, and I knew that I had already started practicing meditation a little bit, and I knew that like this is kind of what we aim for when we're practicing, of developing this kind of presence. But we're not normally able to reach that necessarily in the day-to-day life. But I knew inside that that's something that we can actually attain, something that we can actually experience, even if it's in small bits, little windows of it here or there, that we can experience that in our life without waiting until our last moments. And of course, we don't know when our last moments will be. So that really led me onto the path of taking it more seriously and putting it into practice in my life. And that experience really has stayed with me and has been part of my path.
How did that experience with your mother change your relationship, your own relationship with death? Did it have an impact on that?
Yeah, definitely, because I even wrote about this and on the 1-year anniversary of her passing. I wrote, looking back at the year, how much more I felt at home in the world. I had been to several natural landscapes, like I made a trip with my father and one of my nephews to the Grand Canyon, and I was in the Great Lakes near where I grew up in Minnesota, and some of these places, I would stand out in these natural landscapes and settings and just feel like I felt completely immersed at home and present there in a way that I had never experienced before that. And it had something to do with just understanding that we don't actually die in the way that I had this concept of before, of, going to this place called death, but that we're still alive in some way in the world. And I felt that kind of connection with the landscape and with the world, and it really brought a sense of calm and peace to my own being in the world and being alive and my connection to life.
Yeah, wonderful. So through this experience with your mother, you said you started a more consistent practice. Was it mindfulness practice? Was it meditation practice? Was it MBSR? What was your entry point into mindfulness, actually?
Well, I started practicing with a Buddhist organization, and I did classes in Buddhist meditation and Buddhist philosophy and practices, and I incorporated those into my life, and I studied that for quite a while before I began extending it to others and teaching it, and I only came to this idea of teaching it in this more secular manner when I brought it into the work I do as a teacher, and working in schools and bringing mindfulness to teaching colleagues and to the students I teach. And I actually teach a program for young students, for adolescents. And so in training for that brought me to mindfulness-based stress reduction as a way of training more deeply in how to guide people through meditation and how to introduce it in a way that everyone can relate to. I do have a practice as a Buddhist, but it's not my interest in converting anyone to Buddhism. And more, my practice, my path is about relating it to my life in a way that sort of transcends any religious affiliation, because I feel like that's where we need to go as a global community in order to overcome a lot of the crises we're facing and work together as a global community. We need to speak beyond these sort of religious or sectarian divisions and find what connects us. And to me, what that is just our human connection, our shared experience of this human life.
Yeah. For which mindfulness is a wonderful tool. It's nothing out there, as people often think. It's simply that awareness that you mentioned in the beginning, and then the action that comes out of that, more compassionate action perhaps that comes out of that. Very, very, everyday things. So yes, I agree. Talking to people with the language that they can connect with. So in your life, this Buddhist practice is more for the purpose of your own practice, your own life, and then more professionally you're skewed to the secular side of it. Is that correct interpretation?
Yeah, I have my own practices really help me understand my life, but not necessarily at the level I'm going to engage a conversation with someone who's just new to mindfulness, and so the mindfulness is more an entry point where we can connect, and no matter what your background is, we can agree on the fact that we have a body, we have a breath, we experience many of the same things on a daily basis, and so that connection is where we start from.
So what have been some of I'm sure there are many and plenty, but maybe you could share some of the benefits that you've experienced in your own life through mindfulness practice?
Well, I would say what's really been helpful is goes back to this idea of trust, which is the attitude that we're discussing today.
Yeah.
And it's the idea that I see my life more and more as something that's unfolding in a natural way and that is full and rich with possibility in every moment. And the more that I'm tuned into what's really happening, as opposed to what's, my interpretation of what's happening, but what's actually out there, what's really engaging with me at this moment, I'm able to be clearer about how I want to proceed in any moment, what action I need to take or maybe not take, or what would be helpful to say or perhaps not to say. Mm. So those kind of micro decisions can begin to happen more naturally as I practice more and as I bring that awareness into my daily life, as opposed to, just, okay, I'm doing my meditation, now I'll go on to life. But bringing them together, bridging them, really makes my connection to life more fluid and natural in a way that I can begin to trust my own tuition about what to do, how to work with any situation, what to do or what to say. And also just building a sense of trust in that I've considered my response carefully and to the best that I'm able to right now, and that I can trust the outcome. And it might not necessarily be an outcome that I want or that I was aiming for, but I can trust that that's going to be a new situation ripe with new possibilities and opportunities. So there's this underlying trust that is really built for me through the practice and over time. That's really been part of it for me.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you mention this ability to see when we get stuck with the stories in our head, caught up with the narrative of me and my life as well, and then being able to see what is actually then real, coming back to ourselves and our bodies, our senses, and seeing that distinction. And then, yeah, like you said, perhaps being able to trust, cultivating that trust that my actual experience, I can trust it. It is what my body feels and, what my senses take in.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, this idea that mindfulness, the practice is something that we can really truly only cultivate ourselves in our own life. We can listen to the greatest teacher, we can read the best ever mindfulness book, but it has to happen on an experiential level. Otherwise, it's just words on a page. It's not actually happening. Yeah. It's a thought, it's an idea. And so when we put it into practice, then it becomes real for us. And I like this idea of a musical instrument. Like I play the guitar, and when you have a sheet of music, it's just notes on a page when you look at it, right? But when you have the instrument and it has the right shape and form, the right kind of quality of wood, and the space and the air within the body that allows the sound to resonate, you need all of those components and the strings strung in the right way. And then you're actually able to make a sound and you can hear it. And with some practice, you can learn how to move the hands in the right way and get the right intonation, and then you have the actual music. And it's actually literally vibrating in the body of that instrument and vibrating in our eardrums, right? And so we've integrated it into our body and into our experience. And at that point, it becomes us on a cellular level, on a really basic fundamental level. And then it's no longer an idea on a page, it's our life, right? It's taking the shape of our life. And so for me, that's the most important thing, is really embodying that practice in our life. So going back again to the idea of trust, for me, the trust partly comes from the experiential part of the practice, really taking it into your life and experiencing it in that way, or incorporating it, integrating it into your life. builds this sense of trust of I'm no longer just trusting something that someone told me or that I read, but I'm trusting it because I have experienced it and I know what works and what doesn't work. And if it didn't work, I just toss it out because it didn't work, right? So it's something that's part of me, and there's a trust and confidence that comes from that. And it's not necessarily trusting in something or confidence in something. It's not conditioned. It's just there. It's part of you.
I think this trust in ourselves and the trust that we are able to make the best choices for ourselves, it's a huge topic for today because the options in life and in the world are endless nowadays. And especially I think for younger people, the question of what to choose, which direction to go to, not only the endless amount of options, but also the pressure that they get from around them. And then, yeah, being able to trust that I know what I need, I know what I want. That's a huge thing. And I think a lot of people lack that. What do you think?
And I think that really, those kind of pivotal decisions in our lives are things that it really helps when we can cultivate a deeper sense of awareness of what's really happening within us. What are our deepest, truest feelings about the path that we should or would be best for us to take? You know, that takes a real deep listening that doesn't just happen by reading books or listening to speakers, but it really takes time to be with yourself and hear what is the answer that resonates when I ask myself this question. Yeah. Do I want to do this? Should I do this? Right? And I've been developing a practice that comes from actually the monastic traditions of the divine hours in Catholic monasticism. And I've been working with that in my own life because I found I really wanted to incorporate practice in throughout the day and these kind of intervals throughout the day. And I like the idea how the monks kind of work on each hour with the texture, the quality of that hour, and how it relates to what they're doing in their life. And so I put together this book of hours, which is again not sectarian. It's not based on Catholic or Christian belief. It's more about how do we apply mindfulness throughout our day. And the reason I went to that right now is this idea of intention is the one that I'm currently working with. And starting our day, whatever our work is in the world, starting with the hour that's called prime, with this sense of intention about our work, about what we're doing. And it's really about reconnecting with what was that original intention that brought me to this line of work. And so it's the same thing when a young person is exploring what they want to do with their life, what kind of brings them alive as a human being, what the path should they follow. It's that same thing of looking, what is that inner resonance, that intention that's there, and how do we follow that? And so the practice that I'm going to share a little bit later on is based on that, tuning into this intention.
I'm curious to hear, because you work as an art teacher in the American school in Vienna, so you work with young people. And so how are you bringing mindfulness to the youth, to young people or kids? What age of kids are you working, actually?
Right now I teach kids who are between the ages of about 11 and 15.
Yeah. Because I mean, just hearing you talk, and of course from my own experience as well, mindfulness practice is so useful in building this trust of making the right choices for ourselves. What is your experience with working with these kids, young people? How are you bringing mindfulness to them? Because obviously you can shovel it to them and force them to practice it. What are some of the ways that you found useful in working with kids?
Well, what you said is very true about it's not something that you can force upon someone. There has to be some agency and choice involved in that. And I do actually teach a mindfulness program to the kids, and we do it by offering a full class grade level introduction. So that might be around 70 students at once. They receive this introductory lesson that kind of gives them a taste of what it is and how it might be beneficial. And then they have the option to do further courses, further lessons, about 6 lessons afterward if they want to do that. So that's, and it has been really powerful. So there have been kids who have really taken it to heart and applied it to their lives and found it very useful. And so that's part of it. But I think what's even more important is the idea of just bringing it into what you do in a natural way, and what we call in education teaching mindfully as opposed to teaching mindfulness.
Yeah.
And that's where, for example, last week, right now we're in the pandemic, we're teaching online, and there was a cyberbullying incident that went on. This boy had sent really nasty messages to a particular girl. And so he was kind of suspended from meeting with the class together for a couple of weeks. And so I was individually meeting with him during that class time. And I was really challenging him to work with what happened and to kind of go down and see what was that in me that, that where did this come from, this action, and how did it affect this other person, and, looking at the whole situation. And so applying it in that sort of a way in particular circumstances, or even just the way I introduce something, so that it's open enough that each person can take it in and work with it on their own in their own particular way. So there are ways of teaching mindfully that I think are sort of behind the scenes, but are really resonate on a personal, individual level for students.
Yeah. And you did mention that you've also been training the faculty or your colleagues to mindfulness. Is the intention indeed for them to be able to teach mindfully their students?
Yeah, that's really our starting point, is just for people to tune into who they are as a teacher. And for example, in my school last summer, we organized a faculty retreat. And we worked with this text called The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer. And his idea is really about who is the I who teaches, and bringing an authentic connection with the self into your work and what you do and who you are as a teacher in the classroom. And he says, we are who we teach. And so without that kind of attention and awareness to who is this person that is the teacher, we're kind of disconnected from the whole situation of teaching and working with our students. So that was a way of opening a conversation about it and bringing some practical application in the classroom, and not necessarily saying like, oh, you have to start doing mindfulness now, or you're not a team player. It's really just getting at the root level of what is it to bring our full authentic selves into our work in our classroom.
And I would think actually, especially as an art teacher, teaching mindfully and teaching compassionately is especially important, because you're working with kids and with art. And I think that can be a very vulnerable place for the kids to be, right?
Yeah.
Maybe also struggling with this lack of trust in their abilities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's very true. And it's one thing that I'm always aware of as an art teacher, that I'm working with fragile sense of self at times, and the sort of self-consciousness that arises by putting a line on a page, or in music playing a note, or on the stage in theater. All of these things, we're putting ourselves out to the world in a way. And so we feel very vulnerable. There's a great sense of fear, but it's an unrealistic fear because we know that nothing can actually happen if we draw a line the wrong way, right? Nobody gets hurt, but it's this fear of, you know, how am I perceived? Am I doing it right? Is that person better than me? And so I see my role as an art teacher as helping people to connect with the kind of confidence in who you are and allowing that to just flow into what you do. And you often use the example of our signature when we sign our name. We don't ever do that and think that someone's going to look over our shoulder and say, oh, you know, that T doesn't look for you. You need to do it more like the E, right? It's just who we are. It just flows out of us naturally, and we don't question that. And yet, if we are doing the same thing, having a pen in our hand and making a line and calling it a drawing or an artwork, then suddenly there's this tremendous fear that comes up, right? So it's really about being at home in ourselves and cultivating that sort of confidence that's not conditioned on whether something works right or looks right, but just allowing ourselves to be there in the process. And so I bring that as much as I can into the classroom with the kids and helping them to see that, you know, they don't need to be like anyone else. They don't need to paint or draw like their classmate or a famous painter. Wherever they are right now, that just to do that and to be okay with it. And to see, you know, where they might work with it, but in this sort of non-judgmental way, which is another of the attitudes we work with in mindfulness. And I also work with this in adults. And because as an art teacher, over my whole career, when I tell people, oh, I'm an art teacher, they say, oh, that's great, but I can't draw my sister. She's an amazing artist, but I can't draw anything. And so everyone's always told me that. And so I'm really moving towards work. A lot of my work and sort of side projects these days are on what I call art of being. And I'm developing workshops, bringing mindfulness and art together to kind of work with this fear that has been instilled in so many people from their childhood and their experience in art classes, which, you know, that's the last thing I want, is to be that art teacher. So I really take that seriously. And I'm also trying to work with adults now as well.
Oh, I'm one of those people who, if somebody says, okay, now we're going to draw XYZ, I just completely freeze. My biggest, well, maybe not the biggest, but a very big trauma somewhere from unconscious comes up. And yeah, it's interesting how it's very deep. I don't know how it happened, when it happened, when I was a child, but I'm one of those people who really get scared of having to draw anything. So I might sign up for one of your classes. So you have this professional side, your career as an art teacher. Then you have other projects that you work outside the school, right? Where mindfulness is really, you know, that's the focus. And can you tell a little bit about those projects that you have, you know, on this other side of your life?
Yeah, so I have, as you know, I've taught the Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction courses, and I've done those partially for faculty. And I have also been working on this Art of Being program and running workshops and retreats, bringing together mindfulness with art practices and kind of using it as a self-exploration rather than creating an amazing artwork. Just using it as a way of exploring this question of who am I? What are my deepest motivations? How do I align with who I am, and how is that expressed through drawing or photography or words or poetry, things like that. And so that's a program that I've been developing. And I've been also, as I mentioned, working with this Book of Hours idea.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. So please, what is Book of Hours?
So this is at the current stage, it's an online program which you can access on the website. And by the way, the website is art-of-being.org. So artofbeing.org with dashes.
We'll put that down in below, and we'll repeat that in the end as well. So.
And so right now, the Book of Hours is a way of reflecting on all the different hours throughout the day. And it starts early in the morning with vigils, which technically the monks get up at 5 a.m. And the idea is to be there right before sunrise, so you can experience kind of the darkness before the light starts to fill the sky and the day. And then kind of moving into our day and seeing what each hour is like. And so right now, as I mentioned, I'm working with this hour of prime, which is the beginning of our workday or our day of our activity in the world, and setting a clear intention and beginning to that. And then we kind of work throughout the day to the dusk and to night before we bring a conclusion to our day and go back to resting for the night. And so it's a way of really noticing the flow of time and tuning into the flow of time throughout each hour and each day. And through that, it's like a microcosm of our whole lifetime as well, that we notice the passing of time. And that tunes us into this awareness that there's something much larger that's happening. It's not all our little life, and our dramas throughout the day are not necessarily so big. When we notice that the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth are all in rotation, and the day is constantly moving, and time is flowing, and we can't actually stop it, even though sometimes we might want to. It just helps us to be attuned to that larger perspective and kind of setting little points throughout our day where we can intentionally connect with that.
Yeah, I really like that idea of tuning more closely into the time passing. Time is such an interesting concept, isn't it? Sometimes it goes so quick and sometimes it goes so slow. And oftentimes you don't know where did the time go. But actually tuning into more closely of these different hours of the day, noticing the passing of time and our experience in those moments. Sounds very interesting. Yeah. And so it's an 8-week program with these hours.
There are 8 hours, and right now we're taking 1 hour each week. I'm releasing it on a Sunday to be worked with throughout the week. And there's contemplations and ideas for doing some sort of creative expression with it, or opportunity to share your own reflections on the page. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll add the link and the website in the descriptions. You also have, or you're planning retreats in Sicily, is that correct?
Yeah, and I spoke about my mother earlier, and her family came from Sicily just over 100 years ago. They emigrated to the United States, and so I've always been really interested in this idea of our life extending beyond our own lifetime, and how does that connect up, and my own family ancestry from Sicily is something that I explored and got more interested in, and so I eventually went back there and found the towns where my mother's family came from, and I found their names and birth records in these old records of births in the 1800s and early 1900s, and it was really impactful for me. And so I had this intention of somehow coming back full circle and bringing Sicily is a place that's really economically depressed, and all the young people are leaving, and you go there and you see, the oldest members of the families and lots of funerals, and it's really a place that needs a kind of rejuvenation. And so I kind of wanted to find a way to bring something back to that and reconnect with it. And so that was my original impulse for running retreats there. And we had planned one to happen in June. And of course, in the current pandemic situation, that's not happening now, but it's still on the books for next April now.
Oh, wonderful. Great. You must feel connection in Sicily on a very physical level with your ancestry there. And do you feel a connection there?
Yeah, and actually the first time, you know, my great uncle used to tell me when I was a kid, he told me about when he came over on the ship, and he remembered seeing this film on the ship of a horse galloping. And of course, this was then when film was just the latest, newest technology. And he told me about this town called Vallelunga, which is where they came from. And so I always had that word in my mind. But when I finally went in 2012 and I stepped off the train, and there was the sign on the train station, Vallelunga, and I just went, there's this beautiful landscape of there's wine vineyards and, you know, olive fields, and I broke down. I was just so moved that I stepped off the train, and here I am in this landscape. For hundreds of years, probably, my ancestors lived and worked on that land. And so I felt a deep connection.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. So Michael, we are recording this discussion now during this unprecedented times of the coronavirus. I don't know exactly what the situation is in Vienna. We are in a gentle lockdown here in the Netherlands. How is your mindfulness practice supporting you during these times?
Well, we have also been in quite a strict lockdown in Austria, and it's just now beginning to loosen up. We're given a little bit more freedom, and more things are beginning to open. But what has sustained me throughout it has been that we are allowed to go out for a walk, for exercise. It had to be solitary, or with one other person was allowed. And so one of the things that I've kind of put into my day was a walk. And there's a beautiful old cemetery, actually, just a few blocks from where I live. It has a gorgeous view of the city on a hillside, and it was, you know, birds and the sounds of the birds in the trees, and it was a really peaceful and calming place to walk. And there was also, of course, also this level of that it's a cemetery, and we see the tremendous sadness and the death and despair that has been part of this period, but that's also a reality of life. And it's a way of, for me, it was a way of having a sense of peace about this is the reality of life, that we can get sick, we can die at some point, we will die at some point, right? And so just in a natural way, that helped me to appreciate the preciousness of being alive, and really making the most of this moment that we do have, whatever moments we do have, right? And the sense of urgency of, you know, we're alive right now. This is our opportunity to do something, and if something's not working, to change it, right? And so that for me became a daily practice of just going for this quiet walk. And it was often, there weren't many people there, although over time I noticed a lot more people were discovering that it was a nice quiet place to walk with not too many people.
Yeah, getting more crowded. Excuse me. So for people who are watching this discussion and listening us talk and hearing you tell how you've incorporated mindfulness into your professional life, what would you say to a person who has this intention to bring mindfulness into their professional life, but don't really necessarily have that much experience with mindfulness, but connect in some level with it, and is very interested in it, and has an intention? What would you say? Maybe somebody who is inspired by your story, how you've brought mindfulness into your professional context.
I would say that it is important to really work with the practice on your own for some time, and to understand that it is a practice, that it's not something that happens overnight. And a lot of the deeper understandings that come out of it, the insights that come out of it, don't happen right away. You practice and you practice, and And over time, you start to look back and you see kind of a curve that's happened throughout that period of practice. And then you start to see how you can apply it, not just when you're sitting and practicing, but how you can apply it in the time you're not practicing, what sometimes we call post-meditation, and the rest of your life, basically. And so for me, it was really a process of working kind of internally with that before I started, working it more explicitly and talking about it with others and with my colleagues, or bringing it in a sort of explicit way. I think it's important to have a deeper understanding of it, which you attain really through your own practice for a while, before we necessarily want to bring it into the fold in such an explicit way, partly because if we don't have such a deep understanding of it ourselves, we might cause confusion in others. And so that idea of, using it skillfully takes time.
Yeah.
And when you'll know when that time comes. Because for one thing, you might not have to bring it there yourself. Others might point things out and say, I noticed that you do this really, where does that come from? And then you start to, well, I've been practicing and I find that it really helps me to do this or that, right? And to me, that's kind of a sign of when it's natural, when it's time.
Yeah.
And to address it on that level and not have some grandiose idea that, okay, now is the moment and now we're going to read that. But just, allow it to unfold organically, naturally.
Yeah, I like that. Things don't very often evolve the way we think. The picture in our head is not always how things end up happening. So rather letting it unfold at its own pace and time, putting the effort and the intention there to practice, deepen our own practice. And that's also my own experience. That's how I ended up becoming a teacher, that the time just kind of came, felt like this is the moment when I want to share it after some years of practice myself. Yeah. So Michael, it's been such a pleasure having you here. Tell us one more time, where can people find more information about your work and the retreat in Sicily, Book of Hours? What is the website?
So it's Art of Being, and it's art-of-being.org.
All right. So we'll add that down below, and there is more information about this, the retreat in Sicily that is now hopefully taking place next spring, 2021, right?
That's correct.
Yes, and people can also join the Book of Hours exploration on your website. Yes,
absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time. I wish you all the best in Vienna during these difficult times, but also all the best with your teaching and your mindfulness work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.